Hello, and welcome to another episode of Video Game Reviews. Today I'll be talking about Grandia, or Grandia, however you want to pronounce it, tomato, tomato. But anyway, I'll be talking about Grandia HD Collection on the Nintendo Switch. This package includes HD remasters of Grandia 1 and 2, which were originally released as standalone JRPGs. Grandia 1 was originally developed for the Sega Saturn, and Grandia 2 was originally developed for the Sega Dreamcast. During the remaster, they could have chosen to update, quote-unquote, the menus and other user interface elements, but I was actually relieved to see that they didn't. Or if they did, they at least retained the original style. So, I mean, maybe they gave the menus some kind of a HD treatment, but they still, they didn't change the presentation to make it more modern, and they certainly could have. And I'm just glad they didn't, because Grandia 1 is dripping with Saturn style. From the menus to the cutscenes, Grandia 1 still feels like a Saturn game. Though obviously the visual presentation has been cleaned up probably quite a bit. But so even though this version of Grandia 1 probably couldn't have run on a Sega Saturn, they managed to retain the feeling. That's what I'm trying to say. And the same holds true for Grandia 2, feeling very much like the Dreamcast game that it was originally developed to be. And, which it was. I think that was a great move with this HD collection, because I do feel like, basically every console or most consoles have sort of a look and a feel about them. Like, a lot of times you can look at an N64 game and say, oh, that's an N64 game. You can probably tell the difference just by looking between a Sega Master System game and an NES game even. So every system for some reason has a certain je ne sais quoi, a certain like I said, a certain look and a certain feeling. And I feel like even in the retro or the neo-retro, whatever you want to call it, gaming scene and indie scenes, we see a lot of people trying to imitate the look and the feel of NES games. We're starting to see a decent number of developers that are trying to recreate the look and feel of a Genesis game. We see a fair number of developers trying to emulate the look and the feel of an N64 game. You don't really see too much of intentionally trying to emulate the look and the feel of the Sega Saturn or the Sega Dreamcast. And both of those systems have a really distinct, identifiable, and endearing sort of quality to them. So anyway, my point, my long-winded, no surprise there, my long-winded point is that I'm just glad to see somebody doing that. Instead of saying like, oh, well, let's make this look more like the PlayStation version. Let's make this look more like a 360 game, whatever the case may be. They decided to stick with the OG systems that they were developed for, and I freaking love that. Now, Grandia 1 features 2D sprites on 3D texture-mapped backgrounds, which was kind of a big deal at the time. And Grandia 2 is fully 3D. The backgrounds, the character sprites, everything. Polygon-based 3D models, which was also kind of a big deal at that time, since these games were not relying on pre-rendered backgrounds like other more popular JRPGs of the time did. For example, pretty much the Final Fantasy games of that era, the Resident Evil game, even though those aren't JRPGs, but the use of pre-rendered backgrounds was used pretty heavily during this time period of kind of like the late 90s, maybe the very early 2000s, everybody that I knew that was really, really interested in technical specs, which I frankly am not so much, but everyone I knew back in the day that was kind of aware or in the know of what it really took, or the effort and the tools and the thought that went into developing these games, they were far more impressed by the Grandia games on a technical level than they were of the more popular Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VIII, 9, etc. But ultimately, it does come down to a matter of personal taste. But just putting that out there, even though the Grandia games are not as well known or as broadly known, or put more simply, as popular as some of the other arguably inferior games, they're still great games. These Grandia games are terrific, and from a technical perspective, really impressive for the time that they were released. Anyway, look, sorry. Let's move on from the visuals to the pacing. In both games, I would say the story doesn't really stop moving. Certainly by the standards of the JRPG genre, the Grandia games really aren't grindy at all. The story moves quickly. You're always going somewhere, always doing something. Maybe it slows down a little bit towards the end of these games, but even then it's really not that bad, and that's something that you're just going to find in this genre, period. So again, compared to other games in the genre, Grandia is, I would describe it as very zippy, very just go, which I like, which I really appreciate. And so this sort of feeling is helped along in part by the battle systems, which must have been pretty innovative at the time, especially for a console-based JRPG. Like, they were definitely innovative for the time that they came out. And so basically what they do, and especially with Grandia 1, which actually has, well, no, both games. Basically, they take the active time battle system from some of the Final Fantasy games, and I'm sure probably some other JRPGs out there, and then it innovates on that active time battle system further in a pretty meaningful way, I would say. So basically, as with an active time battle system, there's a meter or a timer near the bottom of the screen, which kind of shows you and determines when a character or an enemy gets to select their next action. And also, along that timeline at the bottom of the screen, it also shows you when that action will be executed, which really, I would say, adds some much-needed strategy to the standard sort of turn-based JRPG battles. And so, also what makes this a bit different from the active time battle system is that, so in practice, what makes this different is that multiple characters can wind up executing their moves simultaneously. This, and so this results in battles that feel, I would say, somewhat more organic, or, I don't know, dare I say, quote unquote, realistic, compared to most other turn-based battles in other JRPGs. And certainly up to the point that these games were released, but, they may even still be considered innovative. Though whether or not newer JRPG series have wisely attempted to borrow this Grandia mechanic, I can't really say, because I don't really play that many new JRPGs these days. I haven't for a pretty long time. I'll pick one up occasionally. So is it possible that someone was smart enough to basically copy and paste or create some variation of this Grandia battle system that I'm so impressed by? It's possible. It's possible. It's been done many times, but I haven't seen it. So if you know of some examples, then, feel free to list them here in the comments. That would be cool. So I guess the battle systems here, they kind of, I guess you could compare them, if you're having a difficult time still trying to picture what this kind of plays like or feels like. It kind of feels like a BioWare battle system, in that, like Knights of the Old Republic, for example, from what I recall, every character is kind of doing their own thing rather than politely waiting for their turn to execute their move. Like if two characters have the same, speed stat or whatever to be able to attack different enemies at the same time, then that's what's happening in the Grandia games. And I'm a fan. I'm old. I have less time. I have a shorter attention span for sure than I did when I was a kid. And so let's keep it moving. I've played 1,000 of these things. I don't need to see every character take a separate turn for every attack. It's ridiculous. Anyways, also adding to the relatively quote-unquote zippy pace of these particular JRPGs is the fact that there isn't really an overworld in the traditional sense. Instead of walking to your next destination on the map, in the Grandia games, you just select your destination on the map, almost like you would from a menu of sorts, and then boom, you're in the new location. And so what you do is you explore individual locations, but I wouldn't say that you really explore the overworld. And honestly, there's going to be some people, this is going to be divisive, I'm sure, for JRPG fans, but I strongly prefer this method. I think that it helps the game, and JRPGs in general, feel more structured and linear, which I think is actually a really good thing in a JRPG. Because if I want to explore, I'm more likely to pick up a Western RPG. And that's just me, whatever. If you like to explore in a JRPG, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not my bag. Yeah, if I want to go wandering, I'm going to play a Western RPG like The Witcher or Skyrim, something like that. When I play a JRPG, it's really more about being told a story. That's what I've grown accustomed to expecting from a JRPG, because that's what they've delivered to varying degrees of success for so long. Yeah, so it's JRPGs for me are really more about the story than the exploration. I tend to feel like excessive exploration kind of takes focus away from the narrative, especially if it's a linear narrative, which a lot of JRPGs are. And since JRPGs tend to be a story-focused work, trying to mix exploration in with that just kind of waters down the narrative to me. Anyways, look, back to the point. Grandia, linear, zippy, good. Everything up to this point has basically, in my opinion, been positive. However, one thing that does interfere with the overall zippy feeling in these games is some fairly longish load times, I would say. These games, look, I'm not bashing them. I had a good time with this HD collection, but these games are so old now that I would tend to think that they could have reduced the load times to almost nothing, if not actually nothing. Although I could be wrong, I honestly don't know what challenges would be involved in achieving a goal like that with these two specific games, but I gotta tell you, it seems doable. Or it at least seems like they could have significantly improved on load times here. And maybe what I just played here in the HD collection, maybe this does represent vastly reduced load times. In all honesty, it probably does, but they still feel a little long to me. Also, in the first Grandia game, just like you would see in earlier CD games, sometimes there's like a weird lag with the appearance of some dialogue boxes, and especially when those dialogue segments are voiced. And sometimes those lags or those breaks in the audio feed for those vocals will pause at weird moments while it loads literally the next word or sentence. But it's a throwback. It's a throwback. The voice acting in these two games, I would say that it's good in that it's nostalgic for the period in which these games come from, but it's not actually great voice acting, like, at all. And I hate to say that because there are some voice actors in here from my favorite JRPG series, which is Lunar, but if I'm being totally objective and I put like Lunar or Grandia voice acting next to The Witcher, I mean, forget it. Forget it, dude. There's no contest. But that's not to say that it's horrific here. It is what it is, and it fits the type of game that they wound up making pretty well, I guess. Look, the leveling system in these two games is a bit different between Grandia 1 and Grandia 2, and I strongly prefer what they did in the first Grandia. It works kind of, it's probably a stretch to say this, but it works kind of like an Elder Scrolls game or an MMO, in that you level up individual spells and skills, individual weapon skills separately. So it's not like a standard JRPG where like you gain a level, a bunch of random stats go up, and that's it. No, if you want to be better with a sword, use the sword more, etc. Like your skill with a mace or, a bludgeon type of weapon is separate from your skill with a sword. And you level up those stats by using those types of weapons. I feel that this really adds a little bit more strategy to how you choose to equip and develop your character. If you're trying to get better with a certain type of equipment, then even if that may not be the best piece of equipment for that character in your arsenal, you might use it anyways just to improve your character, if that makes sense. But anyway, look, I just feel like that adds a little more strategy to the game, which is always welcome in a genre that can quite honestly be pretty mindless and monotonous at times. And I got to tell you that I was a bit let down to see that they had simplified a lot of this leveling system a pretty great deal in Grandia 2. Grandia 2 is still not, like, you still level up individual spells, but it's not quite as intricate as what they had done in the first Grandia. However, Grandia 2 does have some interesting features that make it also a worthwhile game, but in different ways. So Part 2 uses a pretty interesting integration of polygons and FMV. Oftentimes, you'll see that in some of the higher level spell animations, and this results in a look that would, I think, still be considered creative or even innovative if it had come out today. And this, in my opinion, is the right way to utilize full motion video in a video game. Use it where appropriate, use it judiciously to accent the visuals, okay? FMV in a video game should always be a supporting character, so to speak, not the lead, okay? Not the main attraction, as was the case in a lot of our early CD games, so like TurboGrafx CD, Sega CD, the CDI, and even somewhat into the 3DO and all of that. They didn't know how to use FMV effectively, in my opinion, during that era. And I think that Grandia 2 spell sequences are actually the way to do that. If someone had stumbled onto that truth a little bit sooner, I think that early CD gaming would have been completely different and greatly improved for it. Sorry, that was a random tangent, but that's how I roll. You must know that by now if this isn't your first video of mine. Anyways, look, Grandia 2 has those signature, clean Dreamcast visuals. Like most systems, as I said before, the Dreamcast games tend to have a certain look, and I have to say that I appreciated that detail more than I expected to. Like, I didn't realize how nostalgic I was for the Dreamcast until I was playing this game, and I got the warm fuzzies. It's pretty nice. Anyway, so look, onto the audio. Both games feature music composed by the legend Iwadare. Hopefully I got that name right. That's the fella that also composed the music for the Lunar series of JRPGs, which is, in my opinion, a very, very good thing. As I said earlier, Lunar is my favorite JRPG series. I haven't played it in many years, so it could be just sappy anime stuff that I'm not into now. That's probably the case. It's probably the case that the Lunar games just really hit me at the right time in my teenage years, and yeah, man, I got a special place for those games. But look, both the Lunar and Grandia series were developed by the same developer, which you may not know if you're here in the States. So they were both of those series were developed by Game Arts of Japan, and then of course Working Designs was the company that translated the Lunar games for the American release. I thought that they did a terrific job with those translations. They really added a lot of personality and humor, but it was like, it worked. I don't know, it really worked for me. And I kind of wish that, I feel like the Grandia games could have used some of that character, some of that flavor. And without it, they come off as maybe a bit more dry, a bit melodramatic, and so forth, in my opinion. Also, I will say that many of the voice samples, okay, so I'm talking about not the acting, but the audio quality of the voice samples, even in this HD remaster, they are not of a great quality. And a lot of times they even sound a little blown out. Well, at least a few times they sound blown out, and otherwise it sounds at times like they were left, the vocal recordings were left on an answering machine. I have to believe that there are ways that kind of thing could have been cleaned up for a release, again, that they're charging money for. Like, am I using auto-tunes to produce this podcast or whatever? Like, nope. I'm not, but I'm also not charging anything for it. So, come on, man, let's level up our game a little bit here. So still on the point of the audio, there were also audio balancing issues at times where the volume would temporarily just like jump up quite a bit higher than it was and then back down again really quick. And this tended to happen the most often when entering or exiting battle sequences, like right at the beginning or end of a battle. The volume would just go bananas for a second, and what the heck? Like it's not game breaking. Like, these games are still worth. I feel like all the flaws are kind of nitpicky, or maybe just slightly above nitpicky. But that's certainly not anything that I think would deter most people from enjoying these games. But they are something I would say to be aware of. And I think that overall, I like the characters and story a little better in the first Grandia game. Grandia 2 really, like I said, both of these games do get a little bit grindy towards the end and a little bit just drawn out overall towards the end of the games. But I feel like Grandia 2 really devolves into just anime melodrama, which again is typical of the genre, but overall it's something that I feel like companies should be trying harder to avoid. But despite that, these are still fairly zippy and linear games, which is not really at all typical of the genre. I would say, in my opinion, for my taste, these are superior to the bulk of games in this genre. I will say that both of these games need the ability to speed up or skip cutscenes or spells if you've already seen them. Some of these animations are long, and to have to sit through them time and again, it feels a bit excessive. Come on, guys, we know how to fix that. Let's make a few improvements. Grandia 1 took me 50 hours to finish, and Grandia 2 took me 35 hours. Which I'm not exaggerating when I say this. Even though it was only 35 hours, it did feel more like 50. The second game absolutely felt as long as the first game, even though it was significantly shorter. So just something to be aware of there. So altogether, this collection, with the endings, the credits, the deaths, the retries, etc., took me actually 90 plus hours, according to my Switch. As I said earlier, I don't like the Grandia series as much as the Lunar series, but Grandia is still very much worth playing, and Lunar is not available on the Switch, so there you go. Grandia HD Collection retails on the eShop for $40, and that might seem slightly high for older games like these, but honestly, it really isn't. You're getting at least, okay, I'm going to be conservative here and say at least 80 hours of gameplay, probably for most people, and 2 full-length quality JRPGs. Are they my favorite ever? No, but they are good. They're really quite good. And it like I said earlier, it is fun to get some nostalgia for systems that don't get enough neo-retro love, in my opinion. Like, if these games released today for the first time ever as like some kind of indie project, I think people would still be saying good things. So they do hold up. Are they perfect? No, but they hold up pretty well. Anyways, that pretty much does it for this one. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please click like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time, whenever that may be. Bye-bye.
I guess I must have dozed off. I had that dream again.